Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG 737 tech team. Today we are going to discuss the takeoff in the PMDG 737 in Flight Simulator 2024. Now the tutorial is going to start at the holding point of the runway, so we are going to start with the actual lineup items first. So the before takeoff checklist is completed and ATC has just cleared us to line up on our departure runway. For that we are going to release the park and brake, cross-check that there is no traffic on the approach, and then we can do our lineup items, which are as follows. We start up here, turning on the weather radar on the captain's side, auto throttle on, LNAV armed, if applicable for your flight. Note that LNAV is not always going to arm. There are some situations in which LNAV may not arm automatically for takeoff. That is a bug of the real-world airplane that is mimicked by PMDG. Now, further on, we switch the transponder into TARA. The strobe light is going to come on, and provided that only the lineup clearance but not the takeoff clearance has been received, we turn on the landing lights, or the fixed landing lights if we've got an old airplane, and the runway turn-off light, but not the taxi light. The taxi light is only turned on when the takeoff clearance is received. Note that even if we are doing an intersection takeoff, we aim to use as much of the runway as possible. So if you've got space, like we've got on this intersection over here, and there is no conflicting taxiway nearby, then we do take as much of the runway as possible. Note that the yellow lines are only for vacating the runway, they are not for lining up on the runway. A proper lineup happens at a 90-degree angle, and you basically start turning the airplane to align with the runway when the center line passes immediately abeam you. And like that, we have now done a proper lineup. Looking outside, you can see we're pretty much exactly abeam the runway itself, or abeam the taxiway itself, while many flight simuls would taxi somewhere up here, wasting some 50 or 60 meters of runway, which we can absolutely still use for our takeoff. So now we're lined up. Something that you are not supposed or not recommended to do is to set the park and brake while you're on the runway, because the park and brake can cause the takeoff configuration warning system to come on like this. So we don't want to do that. Now, if LNAV does not arm on the ground, that is not going to be a problem. We are simply going to arm it once we're in flight. Now, if I had turned the flight directors on, then LNAV would have come on like this. So do check the flight directors if LNAV is not coming on. Alright, so let's now talk about the actual takeoff technique itself. So we are going to stabilize the engines at 40% N1. During all of that, it is recommended to do a rolling takeoff, provided that takeoff clearance has already been received. Stabilize the engines at 40% N1, and once stabilized, we are going to press the toga switch on the flight director, or on the thrust levers down here, or there is a hidden click spot at the top of the MCP over here. Press it just once, so that your thrust is going to advance to the takeoff thrust selected over here. If you press it twice, the assumed temperature is going to cancel out and your engines are going to run right up to the maximum. Note that the maximum thrust indicators you see over here in green are only for the fixed D rate. They do not take the assumed temperature into account. So your engines may stabilize below the green indicators to set their takeoff thrust. So the only way to get the actual takeoff thrust is from down here on the takeoff reference page. The green indicators are your maximum rated thrust, not your takeoff thrust. Something to keep in mind, as it may look strange on the display. Now, when we start the takeoff roll and we have a very, very strong headwind, then it may happen that your engines have not reached takeoff thrust by the time that auto thrust switches from N1 mode into ARM mode at 80 knots. Then you need to set your takeoff thrust manually. During the takeoff run below 80 knots, we will apply slight forward pressure on the control column, Some pilots have a tendency to do full forward. That is wrong. That just causes a lot of drag and has the potential to increase the wear on your nose wheel. Just a slight forward pressure. If you've got a crosswind, then use slight aileron inputs into the wind, but just enough to keep the wings level, because if you use more than that, then, as you can see on the outside, your spoilers may extend, thereby worsening your takeoff performance. So the spoilers extend at about 2 units, which is just about over here, so try not to use more than this. Unless you see that the upwind wing is going to rise, then use as much aileron as is needed to keep the wings level. But normally, just something like this is absolutely going to do. Reaching V1, we take our hand off the thrust levers, and reaching VR, we are going to rotate slowly. So you are supposed to rotate at 2 to 2.5 degrees per second. That means one of those markings on the ADI per second. At about 8 to 10 degrees, your elevator is going to enter the wake turbulences caused by the wing. Just imagine the tail going down. At some point, the elevator enters the turbulence from the wings and therefore reduces your elevator effectiveness, which leads to the so-called deadband. When entering the deadband, we need to pull a tiny bit more so that we keep rotating at a constant rate. At around 12.5 degrees, you're going to leave the deadband, and you need to relax the control column again to an initial pitch of 15 degrees. Note that if you are much faster than V2 plus 20, you can rotate up to 20 degrees of pitch. Once that target pitch is reached, we are going to follow the flight directors, which are going to be active in toga mode. So from there on, things are going to get a little different depending on the modes that you want to use for takeoff. In my former airline, we did not use VNAV for takeoffs. We simply use LNAV and the toga mode of the flight director. The benefit is that you are going to have wind shear guidance should you enter a wind shear. With VNAV, you lose that. However, since flight simmers often want to keep things simple, they do like to use VNAV mode on takeoff, and there are quite some airlines which do. If you want to do that, just arm VNAV right now, and it is going to come active at 400 feet in the climb. Now, if you want to do that, be sure that on the takeoff reference page number 2, you have selected an appropriate acceleration altitude. Today we are going to follow my former airline's SOP, and that is not to use VNAV, so we are going to buck up, aka set the speed buck to the flaps up position, or to any speed limit that may be on the SID if lower than the up position, when passing the acceleration altitude, which is 1,500 feet above the ground today, so 1,800 feet on the altimeter. Now, when we start accelerating and our speed is above V2 plus 15, and we are accelerating, we can retract the flaps from 5 to 1, and when passing the flap 1 speed, as indicated on the speed indicator, we are going to set the flaps from 1 to up. We are going to keep the up speed until 3,000 feet above the ground, and when reaching those 3,000 feet, and flaps up no light is confirmed, we can select VNAV, put the landing gear lever into the off position, auto brake off, taxi light off, extend or retractable landing lights into the retract position, and the engine start switches to off if engine anti-ice is not needed, and then commence the after takeoff checklist. But that will become rather logical when you see it happening in the flow. So for now, let's revise the most important items before we initiate the actual takeoff. So that's going to be stabilize the engines at 40%, rolling takeoff is recommended. Then we also start the timer, both the elapsed timer, which is the bottom left knob, and the chrono, which is the top left knob on the clock. And when the engines are stabilized, we press the toga switch, either on here on the flight, on the thrust levers, or right up here on the MCP. Or you can just assign a button to the toga knob in your simulator, which is what I'm doing. Verify that takeoff thrust is set by the time you pass 80 knots. At V1, hands off the throttles. VR, slowly rotate at 2 to 2.5 degrees per second, so basically one of those markings per second, up to 15 degrees, and thereafter follow the flight director. At 50 feet, LNAV is going to engage. At 400 feet, if VNAV is armed, then VNAV is going to engage. It's not armed today, so we will not be using that. At 1,000 feet above the ground, we can engage the autopilot and then follow the noise abatement procedure as required. So, sounds good? Perfect. Then let's go ahead and get going. The park and brake is released. Let's start the timers. We've also just gotten our takeoff clearance, so the taxi light comes on, and then we can stabilize our engines at 40%. Stabilized. Press toga. So, slide forward control column, takeoff thrust set, indications normal. Maintain the airplane on the center line, 80 knots is checked. Reaching V1, hands off the thrust lever. Slow rotation, 2.5 degrees per second. Just like that. At 8 degrees, pull a bit stronger to get through the deadband. And gear up. So, 15 degrees pitch. LNAV has engaged. And now we can follow the flight directives. Passing 1,000 feet. Autopilot on. And passing the acceleration altitude, we can buck up. We're above V2 plus 15, accelerating, flaps 1. Speed checked, flaps 1. Passing the 1 marking, flaps up. Speed checked, flaps up. So now we're going to maintain the speed until 3000 above the field, so that's 3200 on the altimeter. And we can already verify that we've got flaps up, no lights over here. And at 3200 we will call flaps up, no lights. So that's now, flaps up, no lights, VNAV, and if we are clear to climb to an altitude above the transition altitude, so let's say we're clear to climb to 7000, then we're also going to set standard, clear the MFRA, set standard on the standby instruments, provided that we are above the MSA, and then we can do the after takeoff checklist, which is landing gear to off, auto brake off. We do not need anti-ice for now, so start switches off, taxi light off, and then we do the after takeoff checklist. Well, and that's everything I got for the time being, so thank you very much for watching. That's our takeoff tutorial completed. Thank you very much for watching. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below.